We are really excited to have you guys here today as our first follow-up to the FutureReadyAPU initiative. I don't know what we're calling it, mini movement, I guess is what. And what you might have seen from, how many of you were part of the Andrew Sears sort of event? Okay, so a good half of you were. So it sort of started, he was sort of our kickoff person for this mini movement that we're trying to do. And I want to give a little bit of a context and background, and then I'll then lead into today's topic. So the idea of FutureReadyAPU is really, it's a local response to a national, and I would say probably international movement about what's happening in higher education. And as many of you know, there are many, many things that are being disrupted or being challenged. For example, the cost of higher ed is just really, it's unsustainable pace. The quality of higher ed is questionable. The success in terms of students graduating, I mean, you can go on and on and on, and there are many, many bad signs of where higher ed is in general and Christian higher ed in particular. However, because we are a Christ-following institution and because we know who wins at the end, we believe in that future where there is hope, where there's optimism, where we can actually make a difference. And I think that's what this sort of FutureReadyAPU movement is trying to do. We have a series of things lined up for the next couple of years, if you're interested. This is our first of that kind of series of installments. We're going to try to, after today, we're going to think about what our next topics are, and then if you're interested, let us know, and then we'll try to work that in. For those who did miss the Andrew Sears event, we have the video recorded. It's on our website, so if you go to apu.edu/ITT, and you can just Google Andrew Sears APU, and you'll find that we have a CTLA YouTube page of which has the video, and we also have the slides. So I encourage you to watch that. I think it's worth your an hour of your time to watch what he has to say. There's a lot of good stuff in it. And so that brings us to today. So strategic foresight is something that was sort of brand new to me probably 4 months ago. Shortly before Andrew Sears came, I kind of first encountered it, and I heard it through this person by the name of Jay Gary. Anybody know Jay Gary? He's at Oral Roberts University. He's a faculty there. Before that, he was at Regents University, and he's done a lot of work in this area. And he was Jillian's advisor, faculty, professor. And so I had the opportunity to meet Jay Gary virtually, and he gave a sort of a strategic foresight 101, really packed in a session. And I found it so helpful. I thought, wow, this is something I think we need at APU in terms of the people at APU in terms of where we, this sort of the competency that we need and where we need to go with this. And so I will sort of just read you really quickly today's session. So Dr. Jillian Gilbert, faculty of the School of Business and Management, she will talk about strategic foresight, which is the disciplined process of illuminating what is on the horizon and applying the insight to informing organizational growth and success. It's extremely valuable and underutilized. I never heard of this field before or this methodology of this process until recently. But boy, is it an exciting lens in terms of how we can understand the future of higher ed in general and Christian higher ed in particular. And so today we'll have lots of opportunities for you to interact. We have a 50-flavor jelly bean exercise that we will participate in, and as well as other more sort of tangible things we can do. Specifically, sort of how do we envision where APU could be in 10 years? And because our time is short, what we will do today is really just going to be skimming the surface of this topic, because this is like a semester long. There's a whole field dedicated to it, so you can get really steep into this. But because of our limited time, we can only really touch the surface. Without further ado, Jillian Gilbert.
Thanks. So, super excited to be able to talk about this subject. It is one of those interesting words, strategic foresight. How many of you have heard that word before? Few of you. How many of you heard the word futuring? Trending? Okay. So there are a lot of those words that we use in strategic foresight. But strategic foresight is an actual discipline among a group of people who are fascinated with the future, but it's more than that. It's playing a little bit with the future. So this is meant to be, even though it can be very intricate and intense, it's meant to be a fun, freed up experience in which we allow ourselves to really look forward. A lot of times what happens is, right, when we think about the future, it feels very heavy, it feels very ambiguous, and maybe it can cause a lens by which we kind of go back and say, well, we can't, how do we know anything that's going to happen 10 plus years out? How are we going to know that? And so we tend to think maybe 1 to 2 years out and think that that's all that's possible. Have you heard that before? You know, sometimes 5 years feels really long, and I've had debates with some people about the strategic foresight in terms of how can we even know with the rate of change in the world, how can we even know 10 years out? And so strategic foresight is a tool that we can use to think more creatively about the future. And so I want to talk about that and give you just a very basic overview of what strategic foresight is. And then we'll do an exercise that you can take something back today. It's that simple, really. So we'll go with that. But first I want to just give you a basic definition, and I'm not going to read it for you. But the way I like to look at strategic foresight is a way that we can look in a focus, with the most information possible to us, we can look at the possibilities. And how many of you guys have strategic in anywhere in your top 5? Ideation, futuristic. Okay. So for some, I have strategic, futuristic, activator in me. So this just like I soak it up, right? But to some, this may come more naturally to you because your mind works that way. For others, it may not, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. And so it just may mean that you have to translate it into the language that works for you. And so I'm going to try to help with that. But basically, we want to be present and active looking at the future. We don't want to be reacting to the future. And what seems to happen is we turn into reactive view because we just have so many day-to-day monotonies that get in the way of us being able to be proactive. So strategic foresight is a way that you can even consider the monotony of the day into your future plan. So that's how we're crafting strategic foresight. But I want to say that some people have viewed this idea of strategic foresight like we're trying to be prophets and we're trying to predict the future. That is not at all what strategic foresight is about. And people can be very careful because they feel like, oh, you're trying to tell us this is what it's going to be like, and then what if you steer us wrong? And really, it's not that at all. It is not a predictive tool. It is a tool to look and say, this could possibly happen, so what would we do if it did? And it's taking what's around us right now and saying, what do we do with the information we have now, so we're not waiting for something to come and then make the decision. Make sense? So it's really important that we don't start to go into that lens, even when we make recommendations, that we don't know the future. So what we think could be happening, an act of God could completely derail what we think might happen. Or something, a key event like a war or some change in the economy can also derail what we think could happen. But I'm telling you now, there are trends and signals now that can inform you about those possibilities. So that when those big events come, you don't say, we had no idea. And so that's what foresight is. It's like, yeah, we kind of saw signs, and we were aware of those signs. So the impact isn't as detrimental to the organization. Make sense? So here's how I'm going to talk about the way strategic foresight works in the strategy cycle. And there's a lot of different perspectives about what strategy is. And so I'm going to use this particular perspective for the purposes of looking at strategic foresight. So we have different layers. We have this jungle where we are in our work and we have to come up with what are we going to do in the next couple years, what is going to be our annual budget, what are the key projects that we have coming down, what do we need to have implemented in the next couple years, right? So we have this 1 to 2 year view. So a lot of times say, yeah, our department had a strategy meeting and we planned out our calendar. Or we planned out the next couple of years what we want to have going on. And that's a real jungle view. You're just trying to make it through and you can't really see very far ahead of you, but you know the things you have to do in the next couple of years. And then you have, if you can get past the jungle, let's say you get free of the jungle, you can get onto the plains, right? So you can see a little bit more to the right and to the left, a little bit more flat. There's not so much stuff right in front of you. You can see a little bit farther out. That is where the 3 to 5 year mark is. Usually like, okay, if we can get past this, in the next 5 years, we want to consider maybe making these kinds of changes, or we want to implement a program, and we're out in that 3 to 5 year range. Now, that is really great, but there's actually one more, and that's the mountains. If we could actually get even past that and look up and say, you know what, the sun doesn't set over there, the sun's actually setting over there. Or, you know what, it's almost nighttime because we can see the sun setting. If we can look past over the mountains and see the color of what may be coming, that's a horizon that's 10 plus years out. And strategic foresight lands itself in the horizon and works backwards. Normally, and I'm going to put this right here, normally strategy is looked at, we have a 10-year vision, let's say, like here's our 10-year goal, and then you start at the 1 to 2 year to try to achieve the 10-year goal. Strategic foresight says you look at the 10-year goal and you work backwards to get to your 1 to 2 years. And that's a big difference in how we look at strategy, because it relies first on strategic foresight. So if we're looking at it, strategic planning is the jungle, strategic thinking are the plains, and strategic foresight is the horizon. Okay? And so we're going to spend time talking about, well, how do we look at the horizon? Because it can be hard sometimes to differentiate between what's going on in the jungle while we're also trying to look at the horizon, right? So here's what it looks like. Okay, so, and that segues actually really well into looking at how we look at the future. So there are 4 different approaches to the way we look at the future. The first is to just go with the flow, and some people are really good at that. People with adaptability can be pretty going with the flow, and there are times where it's really important to be able to do that. So it's not a lost approach to the future, but on the whole, organizationally, if we're inactive, it will impact how we do change. It will impact how we make decisions. It will impact how we spend our money. All of these do. The second is more of a reactive approach, where you just assume that the way it has been is the way it will be. And so you just kind of say, well, we'll get through it. We've gotten through it before, so we'll get through it again. And that reactive approach tends to be more common. I think how many of you guys have seen a reactive approach sometimes, right? Especially it can be very hard when you have a company who's been through a lot of change and has been successful this far. Yeah. Then you say, well, we've made it through every hurdle before. So a reactive approach is very common. And then we have what we call the preactive, which you look at trends and you're seeing trends, and you decide to ride that trend. So whatever is trending now is what we do. And so you can see that a lot with startups, like, hey, there's a new tech company, let's do it, let's ride that wave, let's go, and you just take with it. So you're looking at trends, but you're being really activating those trends without a lot of maybe thought about whether or not that trend is sustainable or not. And so that's why we see a lot of startups lasting an average of 4 years, usually because of that mentality. Okay? And then we have this final one, which is the proactive, where you see the wave coming, and you see it far enough ahead that you can actually decide what you're going to do about the wave. Are you going to go under it? Are you going to ride it? Are you going to, you can see if it's starting to do, what is it called? To see if you want to, go through your pipeline, all of those kinds of things. You become creative with what's coming. I don't think that I want to definitively say any one of these is right or wrong, but I will say that it takes more thought and you have a stronger outcome if you can be more on the proactive side, and strategic foresight is meant to help you with that. so that when a major trend comes, the organization can decide whether or not they want to ride the wave, and if they don't, will they be sustainable if they don't ride it? Or they do want to ride the wave, and on top of that, they'll be the most prepared for that wave because they know which direction they're going. So as we look at foresight, we're talking about being a proactive, looking and making decisions so that change doesn't just happen to us and then we have to decide what to do with it, that there's thought behind it. Make sense? Okay. So here are the basic elements of strategic foresight. There's a great book called Thinking the Future. I actually brought it with me if anybody wants to rumble through it. But it basically gives full steps of foresight in its basic form and what you need to do. But the way we start is with number one, we frame a question. With strategy, it does not help to go into decision making about the future if you don't have a guiding question you're trying to answer. If you just say, well, what do we want to do? Then we leave out key ways that we can search better for information. So you want to frame a question, and that question will tell you where you're going to look, how you're going to look, and how you're going to craft the future. So for instance, for APU, the question is, one of the questions would be, what is the future of APU in the future? What does the future APU student look like in 2026? That would be a question. Another one would be, what is the future of Christian diversity in higher education in 2026? That would be a question. And you see those two different questions will illuminate for you different paths that you can look at the whole. Okay, so it starts with framing. Then you scan the environment, which is basically the funnest part, which we're going to do today. To me, I think it's fun. This is where those of us who are really into academic journals will not, we won't find what we need there. Most of what we will find will be in places like Google, Facebook trending, BuzzFeed, oh my goodness, BuzzFeed, I found tons. BuzzFeed, latest convention news, New York Times, popular press journals. It's the day-to-day news that usually gets a blip on the news channel. If that's where you scan. So it's super fun because you give yourself the freedom to look at random things. So we scan the environment and we look for cues and signals, like that video talked about. We look for signals and cues of things that are really interesting that prompt us to wonder if this is going to be something that's important in the future. So I'm going to give you an example. Yesterday I was watching a new commercial for migraine medicine. Have you guys seen this yet? Okay, it's a new commercial, and I'm trying Excedrin. And the whole commercial is that there's a mom and daughter, and mom said, I just wish I could understand what my daughter was going through, and she had a really bad migraine. So then they went ahead and put together a simulation using the new goggle software to show the mom what a headache felt like. So she's walking through, and she's seeing all the flashes in her eyes, and then at the end, she takes off her goggles and hugs, and she goes, oh, now I know, I can't believe this. And I thought to myself, that was a commercial, but what is it trying to say? And I thought, I'm going to put that one away in my scanning, because could be a possible future of how we understand empathy, how we learn to teach empathy, all of the physical sciences. I was crazy, right? Just over a commercial. So that's how you scan. So if you see something that's interesting to you, you write it down, and you just keep this log of scans. And it can be trends, it can be numbers, statistics, whatever. And we're going to talk about this. So you do the scanning. Then comes an even more exciting part, is you start to tell a story with what you find. So forecasting is actually creating storylines about the possibilities of the future. It doesn't mean they're going to happen, but you kind of craft a world. And you say it's 2026, and now every single person is experiencing empathy, learning empathy in school by simulations on key disabilities the students have. Afterward, they have dialogue. And this was passed by the government in 19, and you start going like on a story of how we get there. All from the trends you have. And you can start to craft, like, I can see if this happens, you know, if the government decided to do this, then people would start to do this, and this would happen, and you start to look at the possibilities of the future. The important part of the possibilities is for you to stretch yourself beyond what you think is possible right now and say, what is plausible? Because if it's plausible, are we as an organization ready for it? And when we do scenarios, the whole point is for an organization to visualize, could they exist should this scenario happen? And if they couldn't, what would the organization need to do now to be ready for it? So it's actually assessing your own capacity to understand the future and make change. Does that make sense? Any questions?
You got locked out.
Oh, I did.
That's my future.
Okay, so then we do visioning, planning, and acting. And so the way it works is strategic thinking happens in 4 and 5, and strategic planning happens in 5 and 6. So that's where you have these scenarios and then you vision, well, what is our preferred future? It is okay to actually craft a preferred future where you want to see certain things happen. So our preference would be that we'd be very technologically involved, that we would have these elements within our profile as APU, and we're going to work towards that. But because we've done scenarios, if something happens, we're prepared to turn course, to make sure to ride whatever event happens. And so the visioning part is more saying, who do we really want to be, knowing the future. So a big question I have for APU, and we've talked about this a little bit, is the brick and mortar of an institution, academic institution. And can APU survive if everything goes virtual? Will it survive if everything goes back to just brick and mortar, which is possible? So it's stuff like that to think about. And every discipline you can attach it to, and to your personal life, which I have done personal foresight for vocational counseling, and it's very interesting. So just think about that. Okay. So I'm not going to go through this, but these are the steps, the decision focus. Basically what I just went through is what we do for strategic. And this PowerPoint will be available, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about trends so that you can understand why they're so important. Some people, we look at trends and say, okay, that was the past, now we're in the present, and this is the future. But what I'm going to suggest is that we actually look at it all as an extended present. The past is fluid with the present, which is fluid into the future. So whatever happened in the past speaks greatly into trending for the future, just as much as what's happening in the present. So you have to look at history, you have to look at statistics, you have to show growth, you have to see where things are increasing and decreasing. But you can't just say, well, that was the past. You have to include it as you're looking at trends because they speak to each other. So that's something that's really important. And the other thing is that you don't just look at the trend in your specific industry. So we call it STEEP. Society, technology, environment, economy, and politics. There could be one event that happens in politics completely unrelated to education that will drastically affect education down the road. There could be a societal movement that you think has no bearing on education that eventually will impact education. There are things all over the place and all kinds of trends that will speak eventually to education because it's a macro level world issue. So even big world issues all the way in other parts of the country and maybe countries you don't even know about could be affecting eventually what happens in the United States and in our institution. And so we have to look at all of them. In my experience in strategic foresight, probably the number one area that most trends start is in the social arena. So if you want to know what really is possibly going to make its way to government, the environment, it is on the social media trending sites. It's those undercurrents that are happening right now in news, behavior trends the way people are treating each other, what's becoming important to people that has a huge effect then on what happens with technology, what happens with the environment. But technology is also a huge one. And a lot of people like to say technology is it. But truthfully, there's something guiding all of that. And so you have to look at what's happening at all those levels and to expand it. So I'm going to give an example just to show it, and then we're almost done. I saw an article about there's a rise on pet grooming because so many people now consider pets their children, right? And I saw this a long time ago, and now I heard that schools are starting to have pet grooming schools for high-end grooming, learning actually how to do it as an art and a certificate to prove, and so then they're becoming licensed, right? No one would have thought a long time ago what pet grooming would ever become something that would be such a large industry. So the next thing is the 3D printers. That 10 years ago, 2007, I'm saying 10 years, like 2007-ish, they started coming out with 3D printers, and it was in headlines, very low. People weren't really paying attention to it, but they created heart valves out of these 3D printers, human tissue. Now, 10 years later, what is it? It's mainstream. And now everybody's doing 3D printing, and we're all excited about it. So you can see that people, if you pay attention, you could actually know what's coming enough to say, hey, maybe we could be a part and contributing factor to being successful by introducing them instead of waiting. Lots of things to think about. So just as you look at topics, no topic is off limits, truthfully. And, you never know what's going to be a huge issue in 10 years, but if it's something that you think is important, make note of it. So that's how we look at trends, and that's how we scan the environment. And it's the funnest part because you get to look at wacky things and think, could this really happen? No, this couldn't really happen. And then you're like, no, it really is happening.